News, 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. It's 6 p.m. on Friday the 8th of November. I'm Miriam Cates and I'm standing in for Michelle Dewberry. And we've got a fantastic show lined up for you tonight. And as always, we expect some fiery debates. Well, Israeli football supporters have been viciously attacked on the streets of Amsterdam, with reports of some fans being forced to jump into canals to flee the violence. Could we see the same scenes here? And US President-elect Donald Trump says he wants to make a quick start on protecting US businesses from foreign competition, telling his advisors to draw up plans to cut taxes and introduce tariffs on foreign imports. The US markets are booming, but how will this affect the British economy? And in addition to his plans to boost US industry, Donald Trump says he will begin the largest deportation effort in American history, attempting to remove up to 20 million undocumented immigrants. Should the UK follow suit? And as it becomes increasingly clear that smartphones and social media are harming children, the Australian government has announced plans to ban under-16s from accessing platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Is this an authoritarian overreach or a vital protection for our children? Well, joining me tonight, we have my panel, Jake Berry, who is a former MP and chairman of the Conservative Party, and Judita De Silva, an expert panellist. But first, the latest headlines.
A very good evening. It's just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Sophia Hill with your latest headlines in the GB newsroom. And we start with some breaking news in the last hour that the United States has charged an Iranian man in connection with the alleged plot to assassinate President-elect Donald Trump before the election. In a statement, the department said that Farhad Shakari had informed law enforcement that he was tasked on October 7th, 2024, with providing a plan to kill Trump. The department described Shakari as an Iranian asset residing in Tehran. It said he immigrated to the US as a child and was deported around 2008 following a robbery conviction. Another top story this evening, Dutch media is reporting that the Dutch politician Geert Wilders will meet Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport. This follows an independent investigation launched by Dutch authorities into an incident where Israeli football fans were attacked when leaving their Europa League match between Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv. The public prosecutor says 62 arrests have been made and the Dutch Prime Minister has condemned the anti-Semitic attacks. Before the match, there was trouble between Maccabi fans and pro-Palestinian protesters, with Maccabi supporters reportedly attacking a taxi and setting a Palestinian flag on fire.
Really late. They came too late. They came when a lot of people were already hurted, injured. Some of them probably go to the hospital. I don't know if they 100 show information.
Now, Nigel Farage has said he's not convinced by the argument in favour of the assisted dying bill. Reform UK leader told GB News that he'd need a lot of convincing to support the bill that's due in Parliament at the end of the month. He said the way the assisted dying takes place in Canada gives him the shivers.
There are people that die in the most appalling circumstances. As an MEP, I was lobbied on that issue more than any other during my 20 years there. So I completely understand why people want this to be law. But I need a lot of convincing that it won't be abused.
And some sports news now. Tottenham Hotspur have been charged with misconduct by the Football Association in relation to homophobic chants by their supporters during a match against Manchester United earlier this season. They were understood to be aimed at Arsenal's head coach, Mikel Arteta, and United's midfielder, Mason Mount. The club now face sanction from the national governing body over the matter and have been given until November 13th to respond to the charges. And it's been announced that the Princess of Wales is to attend 2 Remembrance Day events this weekend. Buckingham Palace said Kate would attend both the Remembrance Sunday service at the Cenotaph and the Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall tomorrow. But the Palace says the Queen's attendance at Remembrance events will be subject to medical advice nearer the time. Queen Camilla is unwell with a chest infection and was forced to pull out of engagements earlier this week. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back in an hour, but now it's back to Miriam.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates. I'm standing in for Michelle Dewberry. And joining me until 7 o'clock, I've got my expert panel, Jake Berry, former MP and chairman of the Conservative Party, and Judita De Silva, who is a political commentator. And as always, we want to know what you think, as well as our panel, so please do get your views in at gbnews.com/yoursay, and we'll be reading out a selection throughout the programme. Well, tonight's big news is that there was chaos on the streets of Amsterdam yesterday as Israeli football fans were attacked, leaving a match between Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv. Now, the attack has been described as an anti-Semitic pogrom by Israel's President Isaac Herzog. And one fan, Yaakov Masri, told Israel's Channel 13 News that they started hitting us, they broke my face, knocked out a tooth, cut my lip, he said. My son got punched twice in the face. He added that he is now locked in his hotel room with tables blocking the door and said, we called the police to send a patrol car, but they said they're occupied with other incidents. I'm in pain, he said. Well, of course, this is incredibly worrying, disturbing violence, but there is the question, will we end up seeing this level of chaos on our streets in Britain? Jake, is this just random football violence or is there more to it than that?
Well, I wish I could say it was, Miriam, but I think the big danger here is that this is the track we're going down in the UK. Only on the 27th of October, we saw pro-Palestinian protesters screaming at elderly Jewish people as they walked into a Jewish community centre to attend a conference. We are a hair's breadth from seeing this sort of violent abuse of Jewish people here in the United Kingdom. And I blame, frankly, the Metropolitan Police and the police who've allowed these protests to go on week after week, getting more and more severe every single time. We learnt with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party is you allow anti-Semitism to stop bubbling up in your society and your community and it gets completely out of hand. I'm so worried by what we've seen on these scenes overnight and, you know, I just think we're so close to it in the UK, Miriam.
Judith, obviously this wasn't in the UK, this was in Amsterdam, but it does seem increasingly clear that this was completely motivated by anti-Semitism. These supporters were picked because they were Jewish. How do you think governments across the West should respond to this?
I think it's a cautionary tale because it's something that I was always worried was going to be the next step, or you kind of bite your tongue and pray it doesn't happen, because what you have is everyone is so polarized and so opinionated and so passionate about what's going on in Gaza. Because you have no power over that and you feel like governments aren't listening, you then make your own little patch of earth, your own domain to exert your own point of justice. And it becomes something depraved like what we've seen. Because on one hand, you're having reports of Israeli matchgoers yelling at Palestinians, Palestinians then attacking them so violently. It's tragic to watch. But that is when people take justice into their own hands because they feel they have no power over the real justice that's needed. But
it does seem more sinister than that, doesn't it, Jay? Because certainly there are many things that people legitimately protest about, whether that's the climate. But this is one step further because this is singling out people, blame people.
And let's be absolutely clear about what happened here. People were coming in from a long way away on mopeds to attack people. This had an element of anti-Semitism and organisation behind it. And maybe it is a big step from where we are on these pro-Palestine protests, but it feels to me like it may not be. Once people are, motivated to the extent that they're going to disrupt our streets across the UK. And in fact, don't forget that this weekend on the 10th of November, On Remembrance Sunday, the police have allowed a pro-Palestinian march to go on in the centre of Birmingham. There are 51 other weekends in the year. Why can they not leave Remembrance Sunday alone? It's one weekend a year. We want to mark it in peace. That is the sort of road that these people are being given to go down, and this is the next natural step. I'm sorry to say it. I think we'll see this on the streets of Britain.
Do you think protests should be banned?
I don't think protests should be banned, but I do
on Remembrance Sunday.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, the Metropolitan Police have a responsibility to actually be more objective about how they sanction protests, when they sanction protests, and they should be given the power to do so. Because one thing I do understand is, like, I do not envy the job they're doing, because what will happen, which they have seen happen in the past, is if you curtail people's ability to protest peacefully or to vent their point of view through protest, it bubbles up into something more sinister. So you're trying to create an outlet but not let the floodgates open, which is a difficult thing to manage.
Well, GB News is going to be sticking with this story, because coming up later this evening on Patrick Christie's Tonight, Patrick will be speaking to Israel's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs on the Amsterdam attack. You won't want to miss it. Well, farmers have expressed their anger after a planned protest against Labour's so-called tractor tax was reportedly blocked due to legal concerns. However, the Met has denied banning the march, claiming it will work with anyone wishing to organise a peaceful protest. Do you think farmers are right to protest? Let us know what you think. Judita, we've just been on a different type of protest. Should tractors be allowed on the streets of London?
I don't think tractors should be allowed, but I do think that farmers 100% have a right to protest this issue, because what I think is, I've mentioned it before on this show, that I think the Labour government has kind of gone for a one-size-fits-all, where they have their charging onto the plane of governance, saying that, oh, we're going to tax the rich, we're going to tax the rich. But it's not one size fits all for the wealthy, because when you have farmers, you have people that are asset rich but cash poor. Because if someone has a farm that's worth over $1 million, tractors that are hundreds of thousands, worth hundreds of thousands, how much money does that actually generate to put in the bank? Not much. So when you now start taxing them, you're crippling their ability to create a sustainable business they can pass on as a legacy.
That's the problem, isn't it, Jake? Because these changes that the Chancellor has brought in will mean that when farmers with ordinary-sized farms die, their children will have to find £200,000, £300,000, £400,000 of cash just to be able to inherit and carry on farming.
Look, it's absolutely crazy, isn't it? So it's 100 acres, which is actually, in this day and age, not a financially sustainable farm. And that ignores the fact that if you've got 250 cattle, that's £250,000 of livestock that you've got to pass on. There's a reason that for 50 years, in fact, 74 years, we haven't taxed farmers in this way, because it will destroy every single family farm in this country if it goes ahead. And on the question, Miriam, of this protest, I mean, what a contrast we've got from these pro-Palestinian protests going on every single week, including the centre of Birmingham on Remembrance Sunday. Farmers not allowed to come into... If you wanted any demonstration whatsoever, that we don't have two-tier policing, we have multi-layered policing. Any left-wing cause, Extinction Rebellion, pro-Palestine, yeah, fine, go and protest in London. Farmers, actually something that really affects people in this country. If you think of the Palestine protest, how does that... why can all be appalled about the death in Palestine? How does that affect us?
I don't
Farmers,
think that
you need them 3 times a day. They provide the milk for your cornflakes, the bread for your dinner at lunchtime, and when you have tea, they probably provide the potatoes you eat.
I don't think it's there when it comes to farmers that... This is just my guess, I'm hazarding a guess, that it is two-tier policing. I think it's just one of the unfortunate situations of timing and logistics.
Farmers work so hard, they don't have time to protest.
Yeah, and then also the police. Everyone's protesting about something and everyone wants to go to London and Westminster, so they logistically have to have a timetable where does everyone go when they all want to go at the same time. And unfortunately, they've come at a time where they're kind of late to the game, so now they're suffering for it because there isn't the space or the logistics for it.
Well, stop the Palestinian protest. This is something that matters to British people. Palestine, we're all appalled by it. We don't want to see children and women and people displaced. We don't want to see people killed. But farming matters to us. No farmers, no food.
But there does seem to be a theme in the budget because, obviously, this is an attack on families, essentially, the ability for families to pass on something to the next generation. The raising of VAT on inheritance tax, attack on families, people who've saved up very hard to send their children to private school. The scrapping of the household allowance for child benefit is an attack on families.
Correct.
Is there a deliberate theme here from Labour?
I don't think it's a deliberate theme. One thing you have to do is see the bigger picture. Labour hasn't created problems, they've inherited problems. And one thing they'll always say is that you'll never know the full scope until you're actually in the seat of power. I think their rhetoric during campaigning and being in opposition had a general idea of what was going on. They didn't know the reality of it. And having stepped into power, they realised, oh, we need to find a lot of money somehow. And they're being very
£10
billion for public sector pay rises.
Police have issued a statement. They've said at no point have we banned anyone from marching on this date. We'll work with anyone wishing to organise a peaceful process. Well, coming up, a new US president-elect threatens global tariffs. Should the UK be worried about Trump?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Penelope's, which is situated in the sophisticated Hotel Armano in Covent Garden, delivers punchy dishes from the executive chef Fez Ozalgan. London-born, she's of Turkish Cypriot heritage, and at the tender age of 16, she enrolled at catering college. So, it's lovely to see you, Fez. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
So you're now in a very prestigious position. I'm always impressed that in the world of chefing, it's possible to get to very senior positions quite young, if you're good enough. Talent is rewarded, is it not?
Definitely, yeah. It does take a lot of hard work, for sure. But, yes.
When did you know that you wanted to be a chef?
Honestly, because my parents have a cafe in Barking. And I used to go there when I was younger, in school holidays and weekends to help them. And actually, I'll be honest, I just used to really admire everyone calling my dad chef, and that's what I wanted.
And what about your food inspirations? Because I believe the food that you produce now is what? Mediterranean influenced and also to some extent Middle East influenced?
Yeah, and Spanish as well at Penelope's, yeah. So our concept at Penelope's, our CEO, Ariel, he is Israeli, but he grew up in Marbella. So, yeah.
These are the great influences.
Yeah.
What have you brought here today?
OK, so we have our sea bream tartare, which is a really good inspiration of both Spanish and Israeli. It's marinated with harissa, and it's served with a really nice gazpacho sauce, caviar on top.
I wonder whether the camera can see that. It is the most gorgeous coloured sauce on top of my sea bream tartare. That's marvellous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Miriam Cates. And keeping me company until 7 o'clock, I've got Jake Berry, former MP and chairman of the Conservative Party, and Judita De Silva, political commentator. And you've already been getting in touch with your views via gbnews.com, your say. Catherine says on the subject of the Amsterdam attacks, protect our Jewish population. They're being persecuted all over again. The pro-Palestine marches should be stopped. Enough is enough. Yeah, it is really shocking that within living memory of the Holocaust, Jews are yet again being persecuted in Europe. And on the tariffs that we're just about to discuss, Mark from Sheffield, fantastic place, I was born there, the UK should be terrified of Trump if Starmer sides with the failing EU. Well, let's see. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been speaking today. He's warned that Donald Trump increasing import tariffs could negatively impact US allies like the UK and may not benefit America in the long run. Well, Trump plans to raise tariffs to support US industries and US jobs. But Lammy stated that the UK will seek exemptions, arguing that harming allies is not in America's best interests. Well, Nigel Farage spoke earlier at the Reform UK conference.
In terms of trade, We are still the biggest foreign investor in America, and they're the biggest foreign investor here. But the important thing is Trump is bringing in a tariff regime. We'll be subject to 10% tariffs on everything we try to send to America, unless we negotiate. And if we negotiate, not only can we get a removal of those tariffs, but I still think the prize of a free trade deal is there.
Well, Judita, you were saying in the break that you think Trump will really let rip this term because he's only got one term. He's got a clean sweep of the American power. What do you think this is going to mean for Britain and the world?
Like they said, for American presidents, the only point you have to really make effect is your first 100 days. And he said that he's going to go for it. He has made pledges to bring industry back to, bring production, bring manufacturing back to America. He's going to do it. Tax cuts, he's going to do it. The tax cuts put in 2017 that are due to expire, he wants to make them permanent. But then they said that, how are you going to pay for that? He's going to offset it with increasing tariffs. And when they say, like, when you're looking at the impact on the UK, he recognises the relationship with the UK, and he says that ideally the tariffs are meant to target countries that charge America a lot when they import from them, but America doesn't charge them the same when it's importing into the US. But what will happen is collateral damage, because some of the most lucrative industries in the UK, you're talking pharmaceuticals, aerospace, vehicles, their biggest export destination is the US. Yeah. When you're taking things up to 10 to 20%, they are going to suffer for that. And then how do you really say that the special relationship is a protection for the UK? It isn't, because this is just business.
But, Jake, from an American point of view, if I was a voter in the Rust Belt who'd suffered the negative effects of globalisation, loss of industry, loss of good jobs, loss of status and hope, I'd be cheering Trump on right now.
Wouldn't it be refreshing, maybe, if we had a government here in the UK that said we want to prioritise the jobs and growth here in the UK rather than worrying about, I don't know, charcoal burning in sub-Saharan Africa? You know, he is doing the right thing for America. Query whether this is the right thing for the UK. I think you're right. I think we should be very nervous about this. It's likely, I think, that there'll be a 10% flat tariff rate on the UK. Let's sort of put that in context. With the currency's moved 2% in the last 3 days. So it is not absolutely disastrous for the UK economy. But I do think the point is it really points to the foolishness of the Labour Party labelling Trump a Ku Klux Klan supporter, saying that he was a Nazi, calling the man a buffoon. Because whoever the people of the United States elect, and 70 million plus people voted for Trump, gave him the biggest mandate for any president since 2004, we have to work with. So why, oh why, was the UK government, the Prime Minister, the Labour Party sending people over to the USA to campaign against Trump in the dying days of the campaign, when most people looked at that election and said, it's neck and neck at best. A lot of people said Trump's going to win. Why have we decided to really set ourselves against him as a country? It will hurt Britain to find ourselves in a position that we've risked that special relationship.
People travelling over, first of all, people travelling over to campaign is something that has been done on both sides for years. The problem was the optics of doing it with this particular election did not do good things for the Labour Party, but the actual acts of doing it is something that's pretty commonplace.
But it was industrial scale, and I think the difference here was that the Labour Party were also paying all your expenses. I understand.
They said that they covered the costs themselves.
No, I don't think that's correct. But I understand. So my experience of the Conservative Party, we said to people, do you want to go and campaign? We'll help you sort of organise the visit, but you pay your own cost. I think that's the difference.
But, I mean, whether or not this has wound Trump up or is it just politics, the economics of this is really significant, because for decades now, the kind of Conservative settlement, and actually the settlement, to be honest, with the left as well, has been globalisation, borrow lots of money, print lots of money, buy everything from abroad, and then suddenly we find that we're dependent on China, which was a bad thing in the pandemic. China are not particularly our allies at all. And actually, isn't this a really interesting change for economics amongst Conservatives?
I do think so. I think, like, also what the thing to notice is Trump, I will even give him credit for this, he's not the same president he was the last time he was in office. You can see a shift where he has more awareness of what position he holds and how he got there. Because like you've just said, his people are the people who lost their jobs to globalization. He has to represent for them. And he's basically saying from day one, you are my priority. And he's going to basically only galvanize his support base by doing that. And at the end of the day, if it's America first, to the detriment of the UK, he won't care because his priority lies on home soil.
Yeah.
And to try and reverse decades of globalisation in 4 years, and that's all he can do, that's all he's got left to him, could potentially be catastrophic for
It
the
could
global
be,
economy.
but
I think that's where the nervousness
he's got a flavour of a megalomaniacal approach to doing business in office that I think that he wouldn't care about how much collateral damage there is, as long as the optics of him making the effort is what serves him.
But isn't this a message, actually, to other countries? And yes, OK, Britain can never be self-sufficient in the way that America has, but we have so neglected our core industries like steel, not just Conservative Party, the Labour Party as well. And now we are so dependent on other parts of the world that we're always in an insecure place. Isn't this a message to wake up and do something about it?
I mean, you can make it up. We gave £500 million to the steelworks in South Wales for it to then close. I mean, the idea that we're not making virgin steel here in the UK, not least for our national security, is absolutely terrible, and it's, you know, very, very dangerous for the long-term health of our economy. One thing I think that is quite interesting about Trump, and I'm really interested to see how this develops, is the developing role that Elon Musk is going to have in his operation. I understand, I've read today that Elon Musk is going to be overseeing delivery of public services and trying to transform them through technology. Now, that's hugely exciting. Whatever you think of Musk, he is a sort of technological genius as far as I'm concerned. And it could give us hope here in the UK, of course, because lots of the problems we have here in the UK, particularly with things like our NHS, is lack of efficiency. If they can find new ways to drive efficiency into public services, that may, as a close ally, enable us to adopt that and improve things like our NHS or prison service and other public services. So that, as bad as it may be, that's going to be really interesting.
An optimistic outlook for a guy that named Elon Musk, because his approach pretty much is self-serving, and there are so many whispers that his move with Trump is kind of a conglomeration of media in the US. And because he knew what was coming down the pipeline had Kamala Harris gotten into office, that's why he pushed so hard for it. So my one is complete nervousness about how he's going to consolidate power through media, because that's basically new age propaganda.
Yes. But very few people have managed to run a business as efficiently and dramatically as he has.
Yeah.
He's certainly one to watch. Well, we'll be sticking with America, because next it's not just tariffs that Trump's imposing, but also plans for mass deportations. Should the UK do the same? And as Labour U-turns on promises to keep migrants out of hotels, what's the solution here in Britain?
Evening. Thanks for joining me for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Kind of more of the same tomorrow. The weather patterns are slowly starting to shift, but again, grey and dry for most tomorrow. But there'll be, again, some sunshine in northern Scotland. High pressure is still sitting to the east, keeping the weather fronts at bay for now. A bit of drizzle here and there today, particularly across southwest England, staying a bit damp and drizzly and dank across the south coast of England tonight, and turning that way too across parts of the east, northeast England into eastern Scotland, seeing some drizzle. Northwest Scotland keeping the clear skies, could see some fog here, and certainly temperatures in sheltered glens likely to get down close to freezing. For most though, we'll start the weekend at 6 or 7, 9 or 10 in the west. On to Saturday. And it is kind of dry and cloudy, but there will be a bit more in the way of drizzle, perhaps along the south coast of England. Again, mostly over the hills, so the moors in the southwest, seeing a bit of drizzle. But also northeastern parts of England, a bit dank and drizzly here, and some of that working into eastern Scotland. Cloudy for Northern Ireland, but western Scotland doing OK for sunshine. There will be some fog around, first thing, and actually that fog could be quite stubborn. It could persist for much of the day, but generally it's the far northwest which will see the bluest of the skies. Elsewhere, again, a pretty grey day. Some drizzle at times on eastern coasts and across the south, but many areas just dry and dull, and a little colder than it has been for much of this week. Temperatures struggling, particularly across central and eastern England, only 8-9 degrees, and with that drizzle feeling even cooler. Further west, we should climb into the teens. Now, on Sunday, we will start to see more of a change, a bit more in the way of wet weather coming into the west. Outbreaks of rain and drizzle, nothing too heavy, but behind this band of rain, western Scotland and Northern Ireland should get brighter for the afternoon. Most of England and Wales staying pretty grey, but some brightness likely in the east on Sunday, so a brighter day here, and also for most of us, a little warmer on Sunday too.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays in Greater Manchester on the M61. 2 lanes remain closed southbound from junction 6 at Horwich to 5 at West Horton at the scene of an accident. In Cheshire on the M62 eastbound, the inside lane's blocked off from junction 11 to 12 towards the M60 towards Manchester, where a lorry's broken down. And on the M60 in Greater Manchester, 1 lane's closed on the anti-clockwise exit at junction 11 at Barton, following a breakdown as well. In Bedfordshire, the A1 at Sandy closed at the scene of a serious accident where an air ambulance is on scene. And on the M5 in Somerset, there are southbound queues near to junction 19 at Clevedon. There's a collision that's now been moved onto the hard shoulder. And on London Underground, Holloway Road Station is closed and northern trains are suspended in Hull and York because of electrical supply problems and a points failure over at Selby. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company, I've got still with me Jake Berry, former MP and chairman of the Conservative Party, and Judita De Silva, political commentator. And you've been continuing to get in touch with your views via gbnews.com/yoursay. And talking about Trump, as we will continue to do so in a minute, Raymond says, we will not be worried about Trump, but Starmer and Labour should be. And Livy, echoing something that Jake said, we're so dependent on the rest of the world because both parties over the years have sold everything we have of any worth. And it does seem like a lot of our major assets are owned by other countries. That's certainly true. Well, sticking with the American theme, US President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to implement the largest deportation operation in American history, saying there's no price tag for his plans. Well, with millions facing deportation in his controversial immigration pledge, is this the answer, and should the UK follow suit? Judita, this is not possible, is it, to deport 8 million, 20 million, however many they are, illegal migrants?
In a very sick way, I'm curious for the world to see what it looks like. If anyone is going to be iron-fisted about it, it's going to be someone like Trump. And to now watch it happen, whether you're going to call it inhumane or insane or whatever, just give it time to actually roll out. Because what will happen is that if you're really going to have a blanket approach to anyone who is here illegally or there's dubious circumstances around their residency in America, it can't just be people who don't look like middle white America. It should be everyone. And then people who get caught in that dragnet will then begin to see that, oh, this is what it feels like when people are indiscriminate about basically being inhumane towards me.
But, of course, it matters how it's done. But this isn't indiscriminate, is it? This is about whether or not you went to America
These
illegally.
people are there illegally. And actually what you saw with Kamala Harris, and it's exactly the thing the Labour Party has done in the UK, she was, of course, in charge of the migration policy under Biden, is when the Democrats came in, they redesignated illegal migrants as irregular migrants. The Labour government's done exactly the same here. We no longer have illegal migrants, they're irregular migrants. And they weren't really tough on them. What the American people have just said at full volume is, we don't want that for our country. And that's why Trump's come in with this massive mandate. And I think that's what we're starting to see and hear in the UK. Now, he says he's going to deport 20 million people. He says he won't put a price tag on it. Others have tried. Apparently, this will lead to a 4% shrinking of the US economy. This is Britain. I don't think we can be quite that ambitious because, you know, frankly, in the last 14 years of the Conservative government, we only managed to deport 2 people, I think, to Rwanda, and they had to volunteer to go. So let's start in the UK and say, let's get rid of 10,000 illegal migrants. Let's send them back to their country of origin, and let's pick the ones who are out committing crimes on our streets. That's a really low bar, and it's something I think the British people would welcome.
Well, you see what he said, which is a very key point. There's no price tag on it. That's why he's acknowledging it's an expensive effort. It's a mammoth effort. And when you're looking at the UK, when you think about the backlog that was created when the Tories just stopped processing the migrant applications, that's a problem that's compounded with new people coming in. So if you're really going to attack it with the speed and the size that someone like Trump is doing, you've got to have the bags of cash to do it.
But the tag is the key, isn't it? So Miriam and I, when we were in Parliament together, we tried to toughen up the Rwanda bill. We were in the vanguard saying we want to keep our country safe, we want to stop people coming here illegally. In my world, it would have been great if they arrive on the beach in Dover and they're immediately put into detention so we can, support them. But even if we can't do that, and we're going to talk about people going into hotels, I actually think we're in a position now where people who come to the UK illegally should be tagged. They should have an ankle tag so the state can keep track of them. Not because we want to give them a bad time, but these are some of the most vulnerable people in our society. They are disappearing off the map. The Home Office doesn't know where they are. We hear about them going into prostitution, both male and female, being exploited. I think tagging people who are here illegally so we can support them and keep track of them is maybe the sort of step that Britain should take.
Judith, isn't this a problem that the left has? Because I completely accept what you're saying, which is that sometimes the rhetoric on the right dehumanises people who have come illegally, and whether they've committed a crime or not, they are still human beings and we absolutely should be treating them humanely. But sometimes it feels like people on the left are prioritising people who've come to this country illegally, criminally, over people in our own country who actually is our government's first duty to look after. How is the left going to get past this block?
One thing I always say is that it doesn't matter left or right. People play politics and they play the optics of politics. So, yes, being seen as being way more humane than the right is going to play to your base. But the actual mechanics of it is that the numbers are insane. Something has to be done. The way of going about it is where you have the conversation about inhumanity. Because even the thing about tagging, that kind of made me clench a bit because that's what you do to criminals. But what I do agree is that there should be offshore processing and there should be something akin to what you have with people on probation where you have to check in regularly. The minute you don't, you're flagged. But giving someone an actual tag, that's something...
But they disappear. That's the thing. You know, all of these people are disappearing and they're going into the labour market and they're being exploited. That is not right. Some of them had traumatic journeys. They've got the most horrendous personal stories. You talk about dealing with them with humanity, and then they arrive in the UK to be re-victimised again, to be exploited in the labour market. They're disappearing. The Home Office can't keep track of them. Maybe tagging them isn't the right answer, but my goodness me, we've got to find a way to keep these people in our eyes and support.
Well, this is a very topical issue here in the UK as well, because Labour looks like they may have gone back on another pledge, as around 300 migrants have reportedly checked into a hotel in Altrincham in Manchester. And despite promises to end the use of hotels for asylum seekers, local residents say they learnt about this, their new neighbours, in a hotel through an influx of cancelled bookings, and they have raised concerns about safety. So should the government have U-turned on the use of hotels for migrants? Jake, what is the solution? This plagued the last Conservative government. So it's supposed to have ended. It's an expensive way of dealing with an issue. Why has this happened?
Well, it's happened, I think, because we're approaching probably going to have record numbers of people coming to the UK illegally by small boats. The government has closed things like the Bibby Stockholm barge. They've decided that they're not going to send people for offshore processing, which was the only deterrent we actually had. People can debate whether it was an effective one or not, but at least it was one. And the government, despite standing for a general election with a manifesto pledge that the Labour Party would end people being in hotels, we're seeing them expand it. I know this hotel. A friend of mine got married in this hotel. It is not a sort of run-down hotel. It is really, really posh. And people who live in Altrincham, recently won by the Labour Party at the general election, will look at this hotel where they go for Sunday lunch with their family, relatives will have christenings, weddings there, and say, you know, why is this being used to house asylum seekers? It's not a cheap hotel, it's expensive. And when you add to that things like the vote today in the London Assembly for all asylum seekers in London to be given free transport, all of the asylum seekers who come to London already get a free bike, people look at it and say, you know, why are we treating these people better? Why are we giving them more support than British people who may, for example, just be unemployed? This
is a problem, isn't it, Judy? The public services in this country are really stretched, and people look at incidences like this, and even if it is small numbers of people, or even if it is a one-off, it still feels unbelievably unfair.
I think that the problem does fall to the Labour government, because what you've seen and what has been proven to very violent effect over the summer is that where there's no information, people's panic, people's paranoia, people's preconceptions fill that vacuum. And when, with this situation in Altrincham, what they were saying at the town hall in the church is, it's fine, there's another hotel that has them, but it's all families, so we're fine about that being families. This was just an influx of just men that have come from a country that we know has questionable respect for women. Yes, that's a justifiable apprehension to have. But if you're not communicating who are they, where do they come from, how are you processing them, if you haven't, when will you, who's going to be monitoring them, is there going to be a curfew? You're just stoking the fires of apprehension and people thinking the worst is possible.
But people who are migrating across the world now, they're not in isolation. They're on social media, they're communicating with each other. They know that if they come to this country now under a Labour government, they will be housed, they probably will be given asylum. There is absolutely no disincentive is there to coming. But the recent Conservative leadership election was fought over whether or not we should leave the ECHR. Do you think we do eventually will have to leave the ECHR?
Well, I believe for a long time, I've written about it in the press, that I think we should leave the ECHR. I think it's a piece of legislation that wasn't designed to cover a global migration crisis. It dealt very well when Winston Churchill was one of the co-authors after the Second World War with the European migration crisis. It can't deal with a crisis on this scale. And I think that will happen. It feels to me inevitable that the Labour Party, even though Keir Starmer has given a guarantee that he won't do it, will eventually decide that, because I think it's the only way we can protect our country, keep our borders safe, and actually genuinely welcome asylum seekers to this country. The problem is there are lots of people all around the world who are trying to directly access the UK from Afghanistan and places like that. We've closed most safe and legal routes to those people because we have 30,000 people, frankly, most of them men, coming to this country legally, really queue jumping, actually, from other people in that country who may have a better case to come to the UK and be welcomed by us as asylum seekers.
I do think that we just need to be careful about touting leaving the ECHR as this one cure will heal all. It won't, because there are infrastructural problems that are British-born that need to be solved. Funding, manpower, the actual infrastructure for what do you do, how quickly do you process, where do you process, who's doing the processing, how do you actually tag, like you said, I know we're using the word tag, but how do you monitor keep track of the people in there? These are all things that are British-born. It's got nothing to do with the ECHR.
European countries with much more right-wing governments like Italy are also struggling because of the ECHR. I mean, Giorgia Meloni had some very interesting plans to try and deport people thwarted by the ECHR.
But I do think that if the funding, and you act, like I've always said, the approach to dealing with migrants to me just seems glaringly obvious. Like, a lot of people talk about migrants, you don't talk to them. Because when you actually start to talk to migrants, and a lot of them I have done, you'll find that the motivation behind what they do is where the problem lies. Once you start dealing with that, they don't even want to be here, because most of the time, once they get here, the promise of England isn't the reality of England when they get here.
Our streets are not paved with gold.
Yes, they're not. And then most of them want to go back. But because they can't deal with the shame of failure, or they don't have the money to go back, they just fester in the cracks of society and all these negative things happen. But because you're not talking to them, you're talking about them, it just compounds the problem. So I don't really know what the solution is.
Well, GB News did ask the Home Office for a statement, and a spokesperson said to Sky, actually, this government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with thousands stuck in a backlog without their claims being processed. We've taken immediate action to restart asylum processing, which will save an estimated £7 billion for the taxpayer over the next 10 years. And we're delivering a major uplift in returns to remove people with no right to be in the UK. Over the long term, this will reduce our reliance on hotels and the costs of accommodation. We remain absolutely committed to ending the use of hotels for asylum seekers and continue to identify a range of accommodation options to minimise their use. Well, we shall see if that is successful. It's clearly not a problem that is going away fast. Well, coming up next, should Australia ban social media for under 16s? We'll be discussing that after the break.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Catherine Richards and Jake Singleton-Hill featured on the reality show Love is Blind.
Well, Catherine and Jake are joining us now in the studio for Saturday Morning Live. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is perhaps not the end result that people might have thought that they'd be seeing at this point, because you were both on the show, but you didn't fall in love in the pods, did you?
No, we didn't. I rejected him.
You guys look great together.
Yeah.
Very happy as well. It seemed like you guys were really strong, and it almost seemed like Freddie, after he admitted to you that he'd cheated in the past.
I actually respected the fact that he told me up front. I didn't even want to have that conversation, obviously. That was a conversation that we got told to talk about. And I respected his decision, but I think he felt that I was holding this grudge towards him that she really doesn't like, and which was not, and he knew this, because off camera we had many conversations where I was like, thank you for owning up, like, we can just move on from this. But if anything, I think he just felt guilty the whole entire time, and he put that on me, which is fine, but yeah. there's obviously a lot that people don't see.
So for viewers who don't know, Love is Blind is where you go and seek love and romance, but you don't see who you're speaking to, right?
No.
So, Jake, why did you go on the show?
My parents actually met in a very similar way. So my stepdad was texting my mum. He'd basically stolen the number off of a friend because the friend had met my mum in Blackpool, and they were texting for like 6 months. They'd never met. So that premise of how they got together and the marriage that they had was stunning. And to build a relationship not based on looks before you met, I just found that just incredible.
So do you believe in that concept? Is it lust or love at first sight?
It's weird.
It's a bit of both.
I think, it's definitely a bit of both. And I always say, as you get older, your looks will change, but your personality will stay the same.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company in the studio, I've got Jake Berry, former MP and chairman of the Conservative Party, and Judita De Silva, political commentator. And you've been getting in touch with your views via gbnews.com/yoursay, and your comments have been flooding in. Lots of comments on Trump's deportation plans. Rod says, we need a Trump in charge in the UK who will put British people first. Janice says, why is putting your country first so bad? I wish our government would do the same. So what if Trump's policies harm us? Maybe then it would force our government to wake up and stop trying to help everyone else but their own people. And Janet agrees. She said, Trump is right to deport the illegal immigrants. We should follow suit. Andy thinks the same. The public want mass deportations now. I suppose the big question is, how would you do it? How much would it cost? But we'll be seeing whether or not Trump is successful. I think all eyes will be on him. He's certainly got to do it, given the reason that so many millions of Americans voted for him. And we've also got people talking about farmers, saying, of course, farmers should be allowed to protest. Absolutely, they should. I think the problem seems to be that they're too busy. The NFU have said that they just want to have a conference instead of a protest. So lots of views coming in. Thank you so much for sharing them. Please do continue to do so. Now, we're moving from America to Australia, and the Australian government is planning to introduce a ban on under-16s using social media. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese claims it's causing harm to young people's mental health, and he's announced plans to trial the use of age verification technology to stop under-16s getting on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. So should the UK follow suit? And if so, is this the age bracket that we should be aiming for? Well, Jake, this is a topic very close to my heart. I have become fully convinced that social media, smartphones are one of the primary causes of mental health problems in children and many other serious problems beside. Lots of governments are starting to talk about this, but the Australians are well ahead in their use of legislation. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I've got 3 young children, and I'm really concerned about... I mean, they're too young to be on social media, but I'm really concerned about what lies ahead for them. I'm not sure I support what Australia's doing, not because I don't think it's a good idea to ensure that age verification is right. I'm just not sure that the age 16 is appropriate. But that's progress. If we effectively, as I do, accept the point that we need some sort of control, then we can move to a proper debate about whether that's 16, 14, 13, whatever it may be. And of course, there are age restrictions on things like Facebook. I think from memory it is 13.
Yes,
but
it's a tick box.
But it's a tick box. So all you can do is you can just knock. If you're 11 years old, you can just predate your date of birth by 2 years, and you can get on. I think what Australia is proposing is interesting because it will stop young people, maybe without their parents' knowledge, short-circuiting the system because they're going to be asking for proper age verification and ID. That's definitely something we should do in the UK because it's enforced in the existing law. Query, is 16 the right age, Miriam?
I completely agree with it. It's something I actually said should have been done before. And I think what is good about it is that for a long time, a lot of governments have been saying that the actual social media company should take more responsibility, but they're not going to because it hurts their bottom line. The most voracious users are younger users. So they will pledge that, oh, I'll put the tick box in, but the kid is the one who's going to actually tick the box. So doing something like this is saying that, OK, we will put in legislation that damages your bottom line. And I think it will force the hand because they've said it's only 12 months and they will reevaluate it. But I think it will scare the life out of social media companies, so they will really be more hands-on about protecting younger people because I think social media is the underworld for younger people.
Absolutely, and it's not just mental health. I mean, if you look at charts of educational attainment across the world, they start falling from 2010 and then collapse from 2014. I mean, this is affecting everything about our children's lives. But the question is, Jake, how do we do it? Because this has been the conversation for a long time, and especially people on the right have said, you know, we can't invade people's privacy, we can't expect adults to give all their details to tech companies. I think the Australian idea is a bit like, you know, facial recognition when you open your iPhone. Do you think that's appropriate? Do you think that's too invasive?
Well, our children's childhood is being stolen from them by this technology. It didn't really even exist when I was growing up. In fact, it didn't exist. We've got to do something about it. You know, children, their mental health, their academic attainment is so important to the future of our country. Now, I'm a libertarian. I believe in freedom. I don't think we should be in the business of banning things, but I think some things are so important. And there's all sorts of things we don't allow you to do. You can't smoke at 16. You can't drive a car. You can't drink. Arguably, you could put social media in the same sort of level of harms of some of those concerns we have about young people protecting their health. I think it's the right thing to do. I'm really, really sorry, Miriam, and I know you were a big promoter of it when we were in government, that we didn't make more progress on it.
Indeed, but a Labour MP, Josh McAllister, has actually brought forward a private member's bill to ban mobile phones properly in schools and to do a couple of other things around changing algorithms. So there is some support from this, on the Labour backbenchers at least.
I think this one is one that will reach across the aisle because it affects children and families. And a lot of parents are feeling that we're no longer having the control we have to just protect our children, because I also appreciate there are a lot of famous people who don't let their children have social media. So it is possible to do. But what they find is that when their children go out in the world, there's a pressure from others that, oh, I'm not keeping up with them. That's why I think this blanket ban is such a good thing, because it puts all children on an even playing field.
Yes, absolutely. It's this kind of collective action problem. If you're the only child in the class without a phone, you really are disadvantaged.
And you've seen a bit, there's this thing called the dumb phone movement, isn't there, where you basically get all the parents in a school and say, come on, let's stop our children having this, let's get them a Nokia 3210 or whatever it is, which doesn't have all of these apps on, and all the parents come together and they agree to do it. It works really well till the first parent breaks.
Yeah.
The first day a child walks into with a smartphone, the next week all the kids have got it. And that's why actually this is the right thing to do, because I just think mums and dads and parents and carers, they just need the government on their side with this to help them win the battle with their children.
And I always compare it to things like road regulation. Yes, of course it's parents' job to teach children to cross the road safely. But if there were no speed limits, if there were no traffic lights, if there were no laws against safety, you couldn't do it.
Yeah,
you need
but I do agree that dumb phone thing is a great idea, because you do, for instance, like when my parents were abroad and we were in school, you need to be able to call your kid at a point, so they should have a phone. And you're teaching them about technology and interconnectivity, yes, but keep it so rudimentary that it doesn't pose a threat beyond just communication.
I think there's also quite an interesting geopolitical aspect to this that certainly the states have picked up on, which is the TikTok, which is one of the most widely used platforms. I think actually British children are some of the heaviest users of TikTok, is owned, or at least probably controlled, by the Chinese government. And we're letting an enemy, let's be honest, into our children's bedrooms, into our children's minds. Do you think there are other risks other than just the kind of actual content that's being viewed?
Well, I mean, I think there are. You're letting the Chinese government potentially into every single room of your house with the camera that they can see what you're doing. We can't, as an adult, we can't quantify that risk. I don't think anyone can. we certainly shouldn't expect young people and children to quantify that risk. And let's not forget the amount of child sexual exploitation that takes place on the internet. There's just it should be a national mission and imperative to keep our children safe. This is a very, very small step to doing that. All it's really saying is there's an existing set of rules and we're going to ensure that those are abided with. We are going to enforce those rules. It's a very low bar, and I hope we'll see some movement from the British government on it.
Yep. Why isn't the Labour Party at the top interested in this issue? I remember when Labour were in opposition, they said they weren't interested in banning phones or social media for under 16. Actually, when I asked a question in Prime Minister's Questions last July, the Labour benches laughed at me. Why isn't this an issue yet for Labour?
I think it's a mixture of things. One, it's like I always say, follow the money. Because when you alienate tech companies, you're in big trouble with donors. Two, popularity votes. When you turn under 16s against you, they are the voices of social media. They will turn public sentiment. The rhetoric around the Labour Party will be profoundly negative and the algorithms will kick in. Yeah. So when you're thinking, if an advisor is going to the leader of the Labour Party, they think, OK, yeah, it's a great idea, but don't do this now. It will destroy us.
Yeah. Now, I should say, of course, that the owners of TikTok absolutely deny Chinese government involvement. This is something that the US is investigating. But, of course, they do deny absolutely that the Chinese do control their app. But we do have a couple of views from you. Problem with limiting social media, says Mark, is that those will be effective, have parents and guardians that will just create an account on their behalf. That is a problem. That's why we need the right tech in place. So thank you so much for all your views. Time for one more. Grumpy Grandad says there's no doubt the internet harmed kids, but how do you enforce it? Tick box is useless and kids will get around age verification. Well, I think the Australian government are going to find that out for us. So I'll be very interested to see how they manage to get on. So thank you so much for joining our show. Thanks for getting in touch. That's all from me. Goodbye. See you soon.